Thanksgiving. A holiday built on gratitude. On warm kitchens and louder laughter. On long tables filled with food, and even longer conversations filled with memories. It's the day people post pictures with captions like, "So blessed." Nothing matters more than family. Family first. Always. But what happens when family first becomes an excuse? An excuse to ignore. An excuse to protect the wrong person. An excuse to silence the one who's hurting. My name is Leah Martin. And last Thanksgiving, I learned something that changed my life forever. I learned that loyalty without safety is not love. That silence is not peace. And that sometimes, the most dangerous place you can be is inside your own home. From the outside, we looked perfect. A stable household. A responsible stepfather. A hard-working mother. A teenage daughter who smiled politely in photos. If you had walked past our house that night, you would have smelled roasted turkey and cinnamon. You would have heard laughter through the windows. You would have thought, what a beautiful family. You wouldn't have heard the whisper under the table. You wouldn't have seen the grip on my wrist. You wouldn't have felt the fear that sat quietly behind my smile. And when I tried to speak up, I was told two simple words. Family first. As if that explained everything. As if that erased what happened. As if protecting the image of the family mattered more than protecting me. But that night, someone refused to stay quiet. Someone who had lived long enough to recognize fear when she saw it. Someone who understood that real family doesn't demand silence. That Thanksgiving didn't just expose the truth. It redefined what family truly means. This isn't just a story about what he did. It's a story about what happens when one person finally says, "Enough." And how one grandmother standing up at the dinner table changed the course of my life. My name is Leah Martin. I'm 19 years old, and for most of my teenage life, I've been learning how to take up less space. I wasn't always this quiet. When I was little, I used to laugh loudly. I used to argue about silly things at the dinner table. I used to believe that home was the one place where I didn't have to filter myself. That changed when I was 14, the year my mom remarried. Everyone said I was lucky. He's responsible. He's disciplined. He'll be good for you. At first, nothing seemed obviously wrong. There were no dramatic fights. No broken furniture. No screaming loud enough for neighbors to hear. Just rules. Lots of rules. Sit properly. Speak respectfully. Don't interrupt. Don't roll your eyes. Don't question adults. He believed discipline built character. And slowly, I became his best project. If I disagreed with him, he'd give me that tight smile and say, "You're still a child, Leah. Let the adults speak." If I laughed too loudly, he'd lower the TV volume and remind me, "Young ladies don't behave like that." It sounds small when you say it out loud. But small corrections, repeated every day, start to change you. I began measuring my words before speaking. Lowering my voice without realizing it. Avoiding eye contact when he entered a room. My mom looked happier after she married him. The bills were paid on time. The house felt structured. Organized. Stable. And I didn't want to ruin that. So when he grabbed my wrist the first time because I didn't respond quickly enough, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. He didn't hit me. He didn't shout. He just squeezed a little too tight and said, "You answer the first time. That's respect." Respect. That word became the foundation of everything. If I questioned him, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. If I stayed in my room, I was antisocial. If I joined conversations, I was too opinionated. There was no safe setting, just constant evaluation. At school, I felt different. Free. I laughed again. I had opinions. Teachers described me as confident. But at home, I shrank. By the time I turned 19, invisibility had become second nature. At family gatherings, I helped in the kitchen. Smiled politely. Spoke only when asked. Everyone called me mature. They didn't know maturity was just fear in disguise. And this Thanksgiving, as I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my sweater, high neckline, neutral color, safe choice, I had no idea that years of silence were about to crack. My name is Leah Martin. And for 5 years, I've been trying not to make mistakes. But sometimes, all it takes is one small moment for everything to change. Thanksgiving morning in our house wasn't loud. It was controlled. I woke up to the soft but deliberate sound of cabinet doors closing downstairs. Not slammed, just firm enough to remind everyone that the day had already begun. He had been awake for hours. When I walked into the kitchen, everything was already in motion. The turkey was prepped. The counters were spotless. The table settings were arranged with mathematical precision. Forks aligned, napkins folded identically, glasses placed exactly 2 inches above each plate. Symmetry mattered to him. Control mattered more. "You're up late," he said without looking at me. It was barely past 8. "Sorry," I replied automatically. He nodded once, like he'd expected nothing less. My mom stood by the sink washing vegetables. She gave me a small, tired smile. "Morning, sweetheart." That smile was real. And that's what made everything harder. By noon, the house smelled like rosemary and cinnamon. Family members began arriving, loud greetings, warm hugs, compliments about how beautiful the house looked. "You two make such a strong couple. Leah, you're so well behaved." I smiled politely, playing my role. Refilled drinks. Took coats. Helped with side dishes. From the outside, we looked perfect. At 3 o'clock, everyone gathered around the dining table. The turkey sat in the center like a trophy. Candles flickered. Phones were put away. My stepfather stood at the head of the table. "Let's share what we're grateful for," he said confidently. One by one, relatives spoke about health, success, blessings. When it was my turn, I hesitated. "I'm grateful for growth," I said. "For learning who I am." It was a simple answer. But his eyes flicked toward me sharply. "Growth," he repeated with a faint smile. "Yes," I said quietly. He nodded slowly, but I felt it, the shift in the air. Dinner continued. Conversations overlapped. Laughter filled the room. And for a brief moment, I almost relaxed. Then it happened. I reached for the gravy boat, and my elbow brushed a plate. A small splash landed near his setting. Barely noticeable. But to him, it was disruption. He didn't react immediately. That was worse. He calmly set his fork down. Under the table, his hand moved. His fingers wrapped around my wrist. Hard. I froze. Above the table, he kept smiling at my uncle's story. Below the table, his grip tightened slightly. "Careless," he whispered without moving his lips. "I'm sorry," I whispered back. "You embarrass me again," he murmured softly, "and there will be consequences." No one else noticed. After a few seconds, he released me and picked up his fork as if nothing had happened. Conversation continued. Laughter resumed. But my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Across the table, Grandma was watching. Not at him. At me. And for the first time that day, I realized something. The table might look perfect. But the cracks were starting to show. When dinner ended, everyone moved into the living room for dessert. Laughter followed them. I stayed behind. The kitchen felt safer somehow, even though it wasn't. I turned on the sink and let warm water run over my hands, pretending to focus on washing dishes. My wrists still throbbed from where he had grabbed it under the table. The skin felt tender, sensitive, careless. The word echoed in my mind. It wasn't about the gravy. It never was. It was about control. Footsteps entered the kitchen. Slow. Measured. I didn't need to turn around. Leah. Just my name. Calm. Controlled. Yes. I replied, keeping my back to him. You embarrassed me. My hands froze under the water. I said I'm sorry. He stepped closer. I could feel him behind me now, invading my space. Sorry doesn't fix carelessness, he said quietly. When you're at my table, you represent this family. You don't make mistakes like that. My table. Not our table. I swallowed. It was an accident. There was a pause. Then suddenly, his hand wrapped around my wrist again. Harder this time. He turned me to face him. Not violently, but firmly enough that my shoulder hit the counter. You think college makes you independent? He asked calmly. You think you can talk about growth like you're above this house? That's what this was about. Not gravy. Not manners. The word growth. I didn't mean anything by it, I said quickly. His grip tightened. You don't get to challenge me in front of my family. I wasn't challenging you. Before I could finish, he shoved me backward. My back hit the wall. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was deliberate. His hand still held my wrist against the wall. You will respect me, he said softly. Always. My heart pounded violently in my chest. From the living room, I could hear laughter and the clink of forks against pie plates. No one knew. No one could hear. You're hurting me, I whispered. He leaned closer. I'm teaching you. Teaching. That word again. As if pain was a lesson. After a few long seconds, he released me and adjusted his sleeve like nothing had happened. You're going back in there, he said evenly. You're going to smile. And you're going to act grateful. Grateful. He walked out of the kitchen calmly, like a host returning to guests. I slid down the wall slowly until I was sitting on the floor. My hands trembled. I looked at my wrist. Red marks were already forming. Not huge, but real. Proof. From the living room, my mom called out cheerfully, Leah? Are you coming? I wiped my face quickly, though I hadn't let myself cry. I stood up. Practiced a neutral expression in the reflection of the microwave. Not angry. Not broken. Just normal. As I walked back toward the living room, something inside me felt different. The fear was still there. But now, it had company. A quiet realization. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't love. And maybe, I didn't deserve to keep pretending it was. When I walked back into the living room, everything looked normal. Too normal. My aunt was laughing at something on her phone. My cousins were debating which dessert was better. The TV hummed softly in the background. My stepfather stood near the fireplace, smiling as he told a story from work. No one could see what had just happened in the kitchen. No one except me. And maybe Grandma, because when I sat down, her eyes lingered on my face a second too long. After a while, guests started leaving. Hugs, compliments, promises to meet again soon. When the door finally closed and the house grew quiet, I felt the tension shift. The performance was over. My mom began gathering empty plates from the coffee table. That went well, she said softly, almost to herself. I took a breath. Mom, can we talk? She paused and looked at me more carefully. Now. Yes. We stepped into the hallway, away from him. For a moment, I couldn't find the words. They felt heavy, dangerous. He shoved me, I said finally. Her eyebrows pulled together. What? In the kitchen. After dinner. He grabbed my wrist and pushed me against the wall. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Leah, are you sure it wasn't just? It wasn't just anything, I interrupted quietly. He hurt me. She glanced toward the living room, lowering her voice. He wouldn't hurt you. He did. Silence stretched between us. I lifted my sleeve slightly, just enough for her to see the red marks forming around my wrist. Her face tightened, not with anger. With discomfort. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked. I tried, I said. She looked down. There had been moments before. Small hints. Half-finished sentences. And each time, she had brushed them aside. He's strict. He just wants respect. You're being sensitive. I don't feel safe, I said softly. The words hung in the air. She inhaled slowly, as if steadying herself. Leah, please, she whispered. It's Thanksgiving. That sentence hurt more than anything else. Thanksgiving doesn't change what happened, I replied. Don't make this bigger than it is, she said quickly. He was probably frustrated. Frustrated. I stared at her. He shoved me. He didn't hit you, she said defensively. And there it was. The line. As long as he didn't cross that line, everything else could be minimized. We are a family, she continued softly. Family first. Family first. I felt something inside me go very still. Where do I come in? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. Because the truth was obvious. Family first didn't mean me. It meant stability. Security. Avoiding chaos. Avoiding divorce. Avoiding shame. Let's talk about this later, she said gently. Please. Not tonight. Later. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed. But because I understood. She wasn't ready to see it. As we turned back toward the living room, I noticed someone standing near the doorway. Grandma. Silent. Watching. And the look in her eyes wasn't confused. It was sharp. And for the first time that night, I felt like someone might finally be on my side. Grandma had been quiet all evening. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean she's unaware. It means she's watching, waiting, understanding without needing to ask. As I walked back into the living room, she didn't greet me. She didn't smile. She just observed. And I could feel her eyes scanning me in a way no one else had. Her gaze was heavy, full of questions she didn't ask out loud. I looked away quickly, afraid that if I held her stare, she would see the fear and the small signs I had been hiding for years. I tried to smile politely, pretending everything was normal. Leah, honey, she said softly after a moment. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Her voice had that calm authority only someone who had lived decades could hold. Come sit with me for a minute. I hesitated, caught between fear and relief. Mom was in the kitchen straightening up, and my stepfather had returned to his armchair near the fireplace, already resuming the same calm, perfect demeanor that hid everything. But Grandma's hand reached toward me, lightly resting on my shoulder. Not in control. Not commanding. Just grounding. I followed her to a quiet corner near the window. The light from outside fell softly across her silver hair and lined face, and suddenly the world outside the family chaos felt a little safer. She didn't speak immediately. Just waited. Watching me. Waiting for me to say what I hadn't been able to say aloud. Finally, I whispered. He grabbed me in the kitchen. After dinner. My voice cracked, and I forced it to steady. I can't. I don't feel safe anymore. Grandma's expression didn't change. She didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She simply nodded slowly, like she already knew. You've been carrying this alone for too long, she said softly. I noticed. The way he watches you, the way you shrink around him. It's not discipline, Leah. It's control. And you've been enduring it silently for years. I looked down at my hands. I could feel the tension in my wrists, still sore from his grip under the table. She continued, family first. That doesn't mean protecting the abuser. It means protecting the people who belong to this family. And you, my child, you belong here. You have always belonged here. No one has the right to make you feel less than safe in your own home. I wanted to cry. I wanted to let the fear and anger spill over, but Grandma's presence grounded me. She reached out and gently held my hands. Tonight, you are not alone. I will not allow him to intimidate you any longer, not while I'm here. You don't have to hide anymore. For the first time that evening, I felt hope, fragile, but real. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I just don't know what to do anymore. Grandma's eyes softened, but they were resolute. You'll see. There's always a way. And tonight, we'll start by making sure you're heard. Not later. Not tomorrow. Tonight. I glanced toward the living room. Mom was still straightening the chairs, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. My stepfather remained composed. But for the first time, I realized I had an ally. Someone who could see the truth. And that was enough to give me courage. After speaking with Grandma, I felt different. Not fearless. Not brave. but something I hadn't felt in years, a flicker of certainty. I returned to the living room quietly, careful not to make sudden movements. My stepfather was still seated near the fireplace, arms crossed, scanning the room with the same controlled calm he always carried. Mom was nearby, straightening napkins and cushions as if nothing had happened. I sat down, forcing myself to appear normal, to blend in. But inside, my thoughts were racing. Every detail from earlier, the grip on my wrist, the shove, the words he had whispered under the table, replayed in my mind. Grandma watched me from across the room, her gaze calm but piercing. She didn't say anything, but her presence reminded me I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the quiet girl hiding from the storm. "Leah," he said casually, breaking the silence, "are you going to help clear the table or just sit there?" I froze for a second, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. Old instincts screamed compliance. But Grandma's hand, resting lightly on my knee as she passed by, reminded me I had someone in my corner. I'll help," I said slowly, deliberately. I rose from the couch, holding my head a little higher than usual. As I walked toward the kitchen, he tilted his head slightly, observing me with that same quiet evaluation. I knew he expected fear. Expected trembling compliance. Expected me to shrink and disappear. Instead, I felt a surge of something I hadn't allowed myself in years, acknowledgement. Recognition that I had a voice, even if it was small. I returned to the table with Grandma following, quietly supporting me without drawing attention. I began clearing dishes deliberately, making no mistakes this time, making my movements visible, controlled, precise. He stepped closer, watching my every move. "Careful," he said. "You're still clumsy. You need to learn respect at my table." I stopped, looking at him directly for the first time in years. My voice was quiet, but firm. "I respect myself. And I will not accept being treated this way anymore." The room went silent. Even the TV seemed quieter. Mom froze with a plate in her hands. My stepfather's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. Grandma, standing beside me, placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. "Leah is not invisible. And neither is this behavior." I could see it in his expression. Control cracking, just a little. The illusion of perfection he had maintained for years was starting to falter. I took a deep breath. I have tried to be quiet. I have tried to be compliant. But that doesn't mean I'm safe, or that I am okay. Mom looked down, conflicted, realizing for the first time that ignoring the truth had consequences. The room felt tense, electric, like the air itself was holding its breath. Grandma stepped forward slightly. Family first doesn't mean protecting someone who harms their own. It means protecting each other. And Leah needs protection. Starting now. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not just noticed. Not just observed. Truly seen. And that night, at the Thanksgiving table, the balance of power quietly began to shift. After Grandma's words, the atmosphere at the table had shifted, though it wasn't obvious to anyone else. The clinking of utensils, the hum of the TV, the distant sound of laughter from a sitcom, everything continued, but under the surface, tension coiled tightly like a spring. I sat back down slowly, letting Grandma's presence anchor me. My stepfather's eyes flicked to me. Not angry. Not overtly aggressive. Just curious, the kind of look predators give when they sense their control slipping. "You're unusually quiet tonight," he said, voice calm, deliberate. "Everything all right?" I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. I met his gaze. "No," I said simply. "Everything is not all right." A pause. He blinked slowly, as if my words were unexpected. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her napkin. I could see the hesitation in her face, the conflict she had been suppressing for years finally surfacing. Grandma leaned slightly forward. "Leah is speaking the truth. And it's time someone listened." The room grew heavier. The casual atmosphere dissolved. Even my stepfather's composed mask faltered for a moment, subtle but noticeable. "You think this is a performance?" I continued, my voice growing steadier with every word. "Every Thanksgiving, I sit here and smile. I pretend everything is fine while you treat me like I'm invisible. Like I don't matter. Like control is more important than safety. He didn't respond. He never yelled. That was worse. He just watched, silent, evaluating. I've tried to be quiet, I added, leaning slightly forward. I've tried to be compliant. I've tried to stay small. But that doesn't mean it's okay to grab me. It doesn't mean it's okay to shove me. It doesn't mean I have to pretend I'm fine with fear living in this house. Grandma's voice cut through, firm and unwavering. Family first doesn't mean covering up harm. It means protecting the people who belong here. Leah belongs here. Not in fear. Not in silence. The room was still. Even Mom's soft breaths were audible. My stepfather's eyes narrowed, but the weight of truth in the air held him in place. I looked around the table. No laughter now. No casual conversation. Just faces watching a truth that had been hidden too long. I will not be invisible anymore, I said firmly, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. And I will not stay silent while someone who is supposed to care about me makes me feel unsafe. Not tonight. Not ever again. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Grandma reached out, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. Her eyes met mine. Steady. Protective. He finally spoke, voice tight but low. You are testing me. I shook my head. I'm not testing you. I'm telling the truth. And the truth doesn't belong to fear. Mom swallowed hard, realizing the weight of her silence. The air felt heavy, but it was no longer suffocating. It was clearing, a slow, painful breath of change. At that Thanksgiving table, for the first time in years, the balance of power shifted. Not with anger. Not with violence. But with courage. Truth. And the unwavering presence of someone who truly saw me. And I knew, finally, that I was not alone. The silence at the table hung heavy after my words. My stepfather's composed mask, which had held for years, began to crack. It wasn't anger in the way I'd expected. It was disbelief. His eyes darted between me and Grandma, searching for an explanation, a way to regain the control he thought was absolute. Grandma didn't flinch. She leaned slightly forward, her hand resting lightly on mine. Her voice was calm, but sharp, the kind that cuts through pretense. Enough, she said. You will not intimidate Leah in her own home. Not today. Not ever. The words landed like a hammer. My stepfather's jaw tightened. His hand flexed at his side, but he didn't move. The authority he had wielded over the household for years, silently, subtly, meticulously, was being challenged in the only way that mattered, by truth and presence. You don't understand, he said finally, his voice low and controlled, trying to reclaim the room. I am the head of this household. I make the rules here. Grandma's eyes didn't waver. The rules of a household do not include fear. They do not include pain. And they certainly do not include silence from the ones who are hurting. Leah is safe here. If you cannot accept that, then you are not protecting this family, you are destroying it. I felt my chest rise with courage I hadn't known I had. Years of silence, of shrinking, of pretending to be small, it all came together in a single moment of clarity. I am done pretending, I said firmly. I will not sit quietly while someone treats me like I don't matter. I am not invisible, and I will not be silenced anymore. My stepfather's eyes darkened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find a way to assert control. But Grandma didn't give him an opening. She remained calm, resolute. Mom, who had been standing behind the couch, looked conflicted. She swallowed hard, finally seeming to see the truth she had avoided for so long. He's been hurting you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, Mom, I said softly, but firmly. And we can't ignore it anymore. Grandma leaned closer to him, her voice steady and commanding. From this moment on, you do not touch Leah. You do not intimidate her. You do not make her feel unsafe. If you cannot follow this simple rule, you will no longer be allowed to act as though fear gives you authority. His hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Every muscle in him screamed control, but the combined force of truth, courage, and accountability held him back. I could feel the shift. It was subtle, but unmistakable. For the first time in years, he was no longer the unquestioned center of the household. Grandma had drawn a line. I had spoken my truth. And the balance had begun to change. For the first time, I felt relief. Not complete, not yet, but real. I was seen. I was protected. And he, finally, understood that control could no longer come at the expense of fear. That night, at our Thanksgiving table, the rules had shifted. And for the first time, I believed that real family meant more than appearances. It meant safety, respect, and truth. Bilkul Das. Yeah Raha Part 9, expanded 500-word version, Stepfather reacts, final confrontation, tension release. Part 9, The Reckoning, 500 words. The air in the room was thick. My stepfather sat frozen, jaw tight, hands gripping the armrests of his chair like he was holding on to the last remnants of control. For years, he had ruled with quiet dominance, a touch here, a glare there, a whisper under the table. But tonight, every unspoken rule he relied on had collapsed. Grandma remained beside me, calm and firm, her presence like an unmovable anchor. Mom stood behind the couch, finally realizing the weight of her silence over the years. The living room was no longer just a space for family appearances. It had become a stage for truth. "You don't get it," he said finally, his voice low but strained. "I've been doing what's best for this family. You're too young to understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I understand that safety, respect, and love matter more than control. And I will not let fear define me anymore." He leaned forward slightly, trying to regain authority. "You are disrespectful. I am the adult here. You will learn your place." Grandma's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of decades of life experience. "You do not define her place. And you do not get to create fear in this household. Leah is not a child to be controlled. She is a person who deserves to be safe." I could see the tension in him, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his eyes flicked around the room, searching for an ally. There was none. Not tonight. Mom finally spoke, voice trembling but real. I didn't want to see it. I thought keeping the peace was protecting everyone. But Leah, she's right. This has gone too far. And I can't pretend anymore." For the first time in years, he was truly confronted. Not by my fear, not by silence, but by collective truth and courage. Grandma's hand rested lightly on my shoulder, a subtle reminder that I was no longer alone. I just wanted respect," he said, voice breaking slightly. "I thought." "You wanted control," I interrupted gently but firmly. "And control is not respect. It is fear. And it ends tonight." The room went quiet. Even the TV in the background seemed muted. My stepfather leaned back, shoulders slumping slightly. He wasn't defeated physically, but the psychological hold he had maintained for years had been dismantled. Grandma looked at him directly. "You will treat Leah with respect from now on. You will not intimidate her. You will not make her feel unsafe. And if you cannot follow this, you will be held accountable." He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just sat there, realizing for the first time that authority without respect is meaningless. I finally allowed myself to breathe. Relief washed over me in quiet waves. I could feel the tension slowly leaving my chest. Years of fear and silence were not erased in a moment, but a foundation for change had been laid. That night, our Thanksgiving table was no longer a place of pretense. It had become a place of truth, courage, and accountability. And I knew, finally, that I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The house felt different the morning after Thanksgiving. Not in the smell of coffee or the soft hum of the heater. Not in the neat arrangement of chairs or the polished silverware. Something deeper had shifted, something invisible but undeniable. I walked into the kitchen slowly. Mom was there, placing mugs on the counter. She looked at me, really looked at me, without that old filter of pretense or fear. "Good morning, Leah," she said softly. Her smile wasn't forced. It was warm, cautious, but real. I returned it, the tightness in my chest loosening slightly. Grandma had left the room earlier, her presence lingering like a quiet shield. I knew she would always be on my side, unwavering, protective. My stepfather entered, hesitating. There was no anger now. No subtle threats. Just awareness, the kind that comes when someone finally realizes they can no longer rely on fear. I'll do better, he said quietly, almost reluctantly. I understand now. It wasn't a promise I believed completely. Change is rarely instantaneous. But it was the first acknowledgement I had received in years, a crack in the wall of control. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I felt a sense of ownership over my own life. Not defiant, not vengeful, just steady, grounded, and real. Mom came over and hugged me. I could feel her relief, her regret, but also her determination to do better. Grandma watched us with a small, satisfied nod. I realized then that family isn't about appearances. It isn't about control or silence. It's about truth, protection, and love, even when it's uncomfortable. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. Not just physically, not just emotionally, but in my own voice, in my own space. That Thanksgiving, I had found more than a meal, more than tradition. I had found courage. I had found family. And most importantly, I had found myself. That Thanksgiving didn't just mark a holiday, it marked a turning point in my life. For years, I had hidden in silence, shrinking from fear and pretending everything was fine. But tonight, I finally spoke my truth. I was seen. I was heard. Grandma stood with me, Mom began to understand, and even he had to face the consequences of his control. Family isn't about appearances or fear. It's about safety, respect, and love. And in that moment, I realized the most important family I could have starts with myself. I finally found my voice, my courage, and my peace.